Amen and amen. Right, so good morning. It's still morning, yes. Yeah, no, the Temple Ensemble will make you, or take you high. I won't say they'll make you high, but take you high. So on this morning, we are beginning a series that, as you heard, is intended to help us establish some practices and establish some protocols to establish and put into place some things that help us to most consistently live a healthy, happy, and prosperous life within the context of the relationships that we have. We are all more than we appear to be. Is that right? We all know that we are spirit, soul, and body. Yep. And so the spirit part of us, the spirit aspect of us, is that part of us that is made in the image and after the likeness of God. It is the I amness of us. It is that part of us that is the breath of God forming the basis of our being. Is that right? Then we have a soul. Somebody say soul. And the soul is the thinking, feeling beingness of us. We say that I am the thinker who thinks the thought that makes the thing. Well, that thinking, that process is taking place within our soul, the structure of our soul. And then we are body, we are physical beings. Raise your hand if you recognize that you are a physical being. Yes, let me see hands all over the place. That's right. It's a sign, in fact, that you are a physical being. I feel like Beyonce. Right. As spiritual beings, we are perfect, whole, and complete. Nothing to fix. As thinking, feeling, physical beings, our interactions with others influence, inform, and form our beingness. Let me say that to you again. As thinking, feeling, physical beings, our interactions with others influences, informs, and forms our beingness. So it doesn't take a lot of time for me to be with you for you to have an impression upon me. We just saw this past week a world mourning someone they never knew. Real mourning, real pain, precedes connection. Why? Because the thinking and the feeling makes it so. Are you with me? So then, it is important, it's critical that we be able to establish a context wherein those exchanges, those interactions, the influence, the impression, the formation can happen in a way that supports our desire to be healthy, happy, prosperous, and high functioning. Are you with me? Because not all interactions leave us feeling that way. It's been said that any engagement or interaction that doesn't reinforce your sense of well-being is one you might want to consider not engaging in. So then it helps to know how to create the relationships and establish the boundaries so that we and others know how to function within the framework of what we have created. Are you with me? Put this in your notes. Establishing boundaries is a form of self-care. Establishing boundaries is a form of self-care. It is one of the ways we signal to the universe that we are saying yes to the faces of love. Establishing boundaries is one of the ways that I affirm to myself and to all that I engage with that I intend to experience compassion, I intend to experience cooperation, and I intend to experience kindness. It's been said that you have to teach people how to treat you. Are you with me? And so a boundary is a thing that can help someone know how to engage with us. Does that make sense? So what's the story, or what's the backstory on boundaries? Unfortunately, we are a part of a culture that is not really clear about boundaries. Well, how do you know, Rev? Well, the Me Too and the Time's Up, and the Black Lives Matter and those such movements are an indication that we are not necessarily clear about where the line is. Are you with me? Moreover, our sense of boundaries change as we mature. Before we came out, we were having a good time in the back, and our board president said, I'm noticing, so just for the record, let me frame it, because I don't want to leave anybody out who's supposed to have a part in this. Reverend Rod and the First Lady were picking on me. And I replied in what I thought was a spiritual way, but I don't think they thought it was spiritual. And so then the president of our board, Mrs. Tiffany White, says, I'm noticing that the Reverend is a lot more feisty as he approaches 50. True confession moment. She is not wrong, Herbert. Right? I am approaching a stage in my life, right, where it seems like I don't have as much time, where it seems like my tolerance is shorter than it used to be, where my poker face is just a flat out right if you don't get out my face. And so I believe it is the kind of awareness that only comes with maturity. Are you with me? And so I'm just kind of at the stage in life where my line, my boundary, my sense of what is and isn't acceptable is like it's just evolving. How many of you know that to be so for yourself? Amen. To God be the glory. And so then a boundary can be defined, put this in your notes, as a line or point of demarcation that marks the limits of an area. See, we can have done a lot of spiritual work. We can have taken the classes. We can do our meditation. We can do our prayer in the morning and do our meditation in the afternoon and somehow still allow others to violate our boundaries. We can do all of those things and ignore and violate the boundaries of others. Are you with me? And so as you heard earlier, this series is about helping us dramatically improve in the area of setting boundaries or honoring boundaries through conscious practice, personal honesty, intention, and patience. See, in the physical world, boundaries are easy to see, right? You see a fence or a sign or a hedge or manicured lawn. All of those things tell us that someone is responsible for what's on the other side of that. Are you with me? And so what boundaries also do is they help us distinguish What is our responsibility to take care of and what is not our responsibility to take care of. It's sort of a symbolic force field, as Pia Melody says. But boundaries can also be crossed under the guise of helping people. You've heard me tell this story about a man who found this cocoon of a butterfly. And as he watched it, he noticed that there was a small opening beginning to appear. And he watched it for a number of hours, and he saw the butterfly struggle to force its body through the hole until suddenly the butterfly stopped moving. And it appeared that the butterfly was no longer making any progress and that the butterfly was stuck. And so the man decided to help the butterfly out. He took a pair of scissors and he snipped off the remaining part of the cocoon. And the butterfly emerged from the cocoon easily, although it still had a swollen body and some shriveled up wings. The man then sat there waiting for the butterfly to fly, but it didn't happen. What he didn't realize was that the restrictions of the cocoon was the struggle that the butterfly needed to get itself through the small opening, and that was God's process for how to force the fluid from the body of the butterfly into its wings so that the process that God put in place could support the butterfly in flight. In attempting to help people, we sometimes cut around the cocoon and we impact or disrupt or disturb their ability to work through the natural process of struggle so that they can for themselves know how to fly. So many of us are surrounded by butterflies that we robbed of the struggle. Your people might not have robbed you of it. Because mama knew that a hard head mama knew that a hot stove, daddy knew, or you knew that papa don't take no mess. And so one of the things that we have to do is that recognize that boundaries give us the ability to be emotionally attached to others, yet they allow us to give up our ability to have a sense of self that is connected to them. You are a spiritual being with a soul, with a body, and you can stand flat-footed on that awareness. Are you with me? So let me just give you some handles for how we want to approach this series. The first thing I want to encourage you to do is to define your boundaries. Put that in your notes. Define your boundaries. See, it's really difficult to honor a boundary that you don't know exists. No. That's not correct, Rev. It's difficult to honor a boundary that you won't honestly recognize exists. Let me say it that way. Don't raise your hand, but how many of you have ever had an interaction and that interaction left you feeling some kind of way? Don't raise your hand. What that feeling was indicating to us is that perhaps a line had been crossed. What that feeling is trying to say to us is that something is off within the context of this exchange. And so it's important. No. It's critical. It's necessary for us to be able to be honest and upfront and integrity with what our lines are, but you can't honor a line that you won't admit exists. Get in the car, somebody asks you what you want to listen to, you just, whatever you want to listen to. They ask you where you want to go out to eat, wherever you want to go out to eat. What you want to go see at the movies, whatever you want to see at the movies. As if you have no preferences. But you were probably listening to something before you got in their car. Am I lying about it? So you have to be able to define your boundaries. Gina Greenlee says, honoring your boundaries is the clearest message to others to honor them too. So it's up to each and every one of us to define and maintain our boundaries and to honor the boundaries of others. Poorly defined boundaries can be a cause of great deal of unnecessary suffering, and you were not made to suffer. It is not the Father's will that you suffer. As a matter of fact, we say the primary cause of suffering is. And if you forget that you have lines, if you forget and pretend like you don't know what feels good to you and what makes you uneasy, it's okay to say no in defining your boundaries. As a matter of fact, no is one of the most powerful definers of a boundary there is. It's okay to say, no, you don't get to talk to me like that. It's okay to say, no, I will not accept that behavior. It's okay. Put this in your notes. You can say no and still be loved. What did the choir just sing earlier? The love of God never fails. So even if you're alone, you're still in love. But you've got to be willing to own your boundary. You've got to be willing to define your lines. You have a whole bag of no's. Use them. Use them. Let's practice. Can I borrow $5? Can I borrow your car? No. Can I move in with you? No. Can I buy you a drink? Just at least one, baby, at least one. At least one, just one. Just one. You can only buy me one. Mm-hmm. Oh, I know it's the right message for the right crowd. As you're defining your boundaries, ask yourself these few questions. How do you want the world to experience you? And how do you want to experience the world? This will help you define your boundary. Part of that is just being clear for yourself. Do you believe, you have to make a decision about whether or not the universe is friendly or hostile. That impacts, that informs, that influences how you want the world to see you and how you see the world. In order to define your boundary, you have to ask yourself, what kind of access do I want to give to my heart? The scripture says, guard your heart with all diligence, for out of it comes the issues. If you guard it correctly with a boundary, you can avoid some of the issues. There's one book that's titled, I Am Always My Own Experience. If I am my own experience, then why am I blaming other people about what I'm going through? Maybe I just ought to check my personal boundaries that I'm living by. Are you with me? How do you define your boundary? You have to determine what you want people to see in your yard. You've got to make that decision. And then last, how do you define your boundary? You have to decide how you will share your brilliance. And sometimes it's not always easy to catch the boundary. Some of you saw the post that we put up on Monday. And in the post, I said that my son called me. I was actually right up here in the balcony. I came back to the church Sunday afternoon, and my son called me when I was sitting right behind where Vernon is. And as I said in the post, like I could hear in his voice that something was off. Right? I could hear that he wasn't all the way cool. But I was in the middle of work. Right? How many of you run right past the boundary because you're in the middle of something that's important? And so what I didn't say in the post was that emotionally, I knew he needed his dad. I knew he needed it. But I was in the middle of work. I was in the middle of ministry. I was in the middle of being about the Father's business. But the Father is not making a distinction between the Father's business and the Father's business. Right? Both are ministry. And so in our lives, as we're defining our boundaries, we have to be conscious, we have to be aware, because it's really easy to shoot past the boundary in the name of good work. I remember another time, Sylvia and I were in the ER, and not as guests. Right? We are in the ER. And I see one of our members, and his wife is in back. And as I walk toward the door to find out when is my wife going in the back? And he comes out and he sees me and his face lights up. He said, "Man, you are the answer to my prayers." True confession moment. I'm not trying to be here for you. I'm trying to be here for my wife. He doesn't care. But he asked me, like, "What are you doing here?" Well, had something going on. First lady's here. Walked over to her, looking in her face like, "Oh yeah, you're gonna be all right. Rev, come on, can you go pray with my wife?" Like, there's gotta be a line. There's gotta be a line somewhere in there, right? Can I tell you what I did? I went with my member to pray with his wife while my wife is writhing in pain. The crossing of the boundary can be subtle. That's my point. Right? If we're not intentional about how we define our boundaries, we can cross our own internal boundaries. We can cross or violate our own internal values just as easily as we can do them to others. And look at this. If I'm willing to do it with mine, imagine what I will do with yours. Are you with me? And so you just have to be able to define your boundaries. Use your nose. The second part of establishing your boundaries, the backstory on boundaries, is you have to get clarity on your consequences. So if the fence is the boundary, the cuts and the scratches that come from the barbed wire is the consequence. Are you with me? How many of you, by show of hands, have seen a brick wall or a brick structure? You've seen a brick wall, brick home, brick building? Seen those by show of hands? That should be most of you. If you don't live under a brick, you should have seen some sort of brick structure somewhere, right? But if you even just paid a cursory glance of attention to the brick wall, what you probably noticed is that in between each layer of the course is a layer of mortar. Not only in between the courses, but even in between the bricks on the same level, on the same course, there is a layer of mortar. It's the mortar that actually makes the brick house strong. Are you with me? Likewise, it's the consequence that makes the boundary stand up. Are you with me? See, there's a reason why, as you're speeding down the highway, you slow down when you see the sheriff. Because you know the consequence is a speeding ticket. Unless you're Reverend Fanny, then you don't slow down. She drives faster than me, y'all. Where y'all oohing? I'm just poking fun. Y'all take this too serious. Y'all play too much. Right? But there must be some consequences to our boundaries. If there are no consequences, then the boundaries will be shot past every time. If the hint of consequence is present, it impacts how we behave. So there can be a sheriff's car on the side of the road with no sheriff in it. How many of you slow down? You're in church. Because even the threat of consequence is real for us. If there is no consequence in the boundary that you set for yourself or for others, then there will be no way to honor and uphold the integrity of the boundary. If you have a sign up that says, "Beware of dog," and I walk through the yard and no dog barks, I'll probably take that path again. So there must be some consequence. There's got to be some bite. You know what I mean? In the field of psychology, they call it classical conditioning. How do you help people help you in relationship? You've got to condition them. One of the ways that the Apostle Paul said we do it is those that don't work. That's the consequence, right? Those who get poor grades, don't go out on the weekend. Those who don't do their homework, don't have cell phone privileges. You with me? So how do we establish and get clarity on our consequences? One of the first things we can do, put this in your notes, is don't interfere with the natural consequence. Don't interfere with the natural consequence. What does that mean? That means well, let me say it to you this way, and he might be watching, so forgive me if you're watching. I had a good friend when I was in the Navy who made the same money I made, maybe even made a little bit more. And he bought a motorcycle. I thought that motorcycle was nice. As a matter of fact, he put me on it, took me for a ride. Then when we got back, he's like, "Can you loan me some money for gas?" I'm like, wait a minute. You spent a few $1,000s on a bike that you can't put fuel in? Like, no. Like, and this is my guy. We fell out a little bit behind this. Because the natural consequence is you can't spend all your money and expect you're going to use mine. Right? Those who don't work don't eat. So there is something to be said for not saving people against the natural consequence. When we save people against the natural consequence, it upsets their learning curve. And what will keep you from doing it again? Behavior, repeat after me, behavior is consistent. Second thing you can do in order to get clarity on your consequences is determine the severity needed to recondition the behavior. What do I mean? I mean, when somebody shoots past your boundary, you want to make sure that the punishment fits the crime. Right? Like you don't have to be on punishment for the whole summer because you didn't wash the car. Are you with me? Last but not least, you put some distance in between the violator of the boundary. See, sometimes you just have to remove yourself from it. Jesus did this often. Every now and again, you hear about him going apart. Why? Because putting some distance in between yourself and what it is you're engaged with helps you gain some perspective. It helps you recalibrate mentally and emotionally. It helps you realign yourself so that you can make sure that the way that you are moving is consistent with God's will for you. Are you with me? I'm going to give you this last point and then we'll close. Establishing boundaries, the backstory on it. One of the things I want to encourage you to do as you define your boundaries and as you get clear about your consequences, I want to encourage you to also just make sure you build in a gate. Because there is some stuff that folks bring to you that's good. Right? So the boundary doesn't have to be a wall. You don't have to wall yourself off from your relationships. You want to have a gate so the good can come to you. Are you with me? You also want to have a gate so that the stuff you need to release can get out. Because just as somebody might cross your boundary, you want to leave some space open so that you can learn how to recondition yourself to not cross their boundaries. It's called intentional life design. Making sure that even something as subtle as the line is honored. So I want to encourage you to consider your boundaries. I want to encourage you to not ignore when the crossing of a boundary, whether it's at your hands or at the hands of someone else, when your feeling, when your emotion tells you that a line has been crossed, don't ignore that. Pay attention to it. It's trying to teach you something. And emotions that go unignored do not go away. When we don't address them, they just fester. They just build up. They just become larger. So then the next time they cross the boundary, you take a head off. Like, wait a minute. All I did was come in after curfew. Well, it's all those other times that the boundary was not honored. So get clarity on your consequences and make sure that you install a gate so that the good can flow in and that which you no longer need can flow out.